There are words that cross time like rays of light, illuminating paths even after millennia. Final words, especially from great teachers, carry the distillation of a lifetime of wisdom. They represent what, on the threshold between life and death, they considered essential to transmit. Ever wondered what you would say if you knew they were your last words? What final lesson would you leave? What truth would you consider so fundamental that it deserves to be your last conscious breath? Today, we will explore the last words of one of the greatest spiritual revolutionaries in human history, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. But make no mistake, what you will hear is not just another spiritual lesson. It is a message that, understood deeply, has the power to radically transform your perception of reality. The most surprising, despite their depth, these final words remain largely unknown to most people. And here's the paradox. Even many devout practitioners of Buddhism rarely reflect on their own founder's ultimate message. Why? Because these words, in their disconcerting simplicity, contain a truth that challenges our most cherished illusions. A truth that troubles not only the individual ego, but also the power structures that have formed around virtually all spiritual traditions. What you will hear in the next few minutes is not a superficial interpretation. Let's delve into the layers of meaning of these final words, exploring both their historical context and their revolutionary application to our modern lives. Prepare yourself. This is not content for passive consumption. Buddha's final words invite us to active awakening, to a radically different relationship with our own existence. The man behind the myth. Before we explore his last words, we need to understand who this extraordinary man was. Siddhartha Gautama was born around the 6th century BC in Lumbini, in present-day Nepal, the son of the leader of the Shakya clan. Far from being a god or supernatural being, Siddhartha was a privileged man, raised in luxury and comfort. His father, determined to protect him from any suffering, created an artificial environment where the young prince would have no contact with the harsh realities of human existence. Imagine growing up in a world where all you see are young, healthy, happy people. A world carefully orchestrated to hide illness, old age, death, and any form of suffering. It was in this artificial world that Siddhartha lived until he was 29 years old. But fate has its own plans. In a series of secret exits from the palace, accompanied by his charioteer Channa, Siddhartha finally saw what had been hidden from him: a sick man, hunched over in pain, an elderly man, bent by the weight of years, a corpse being taken for cremation, and finally a serene ascetic who seemed to have found peace amidst the chaos of existence. These 4 encounters were not just shocks for the young prince, they were the complete undoing of his worldview. Imagine discovering at age 29 that your entire reality had been a carefully constructed illusion, that life was not this perpetual dance of pleasure that he had been presented with, but a complex process inevitably marked by suffering. This revelation was so profound that on one decisive night, Siddhartha abandoned his palace, his wife, his newborn son, his riches, everything that made up his identity, to seek answers to fundamental questions. Why do we suffer? Is there a way out of this suffering? For 6 years he walked the path of ascetics, subjecting himself to extreme austerities. He fasted until he could feel his spine when it touched his stomach, exposed to extreme weather elements. He held his breath until he almost passed out. He came so close to death that, when he finally abandoned these extreme practices, a handful of followers abandoned him, accusing him of having given up on his search. It was then, after accepting a simple bowl of rice and milk from a young woman named Sujata, that Siddhartha sat down under a fig tree and vowed not to get up until he found answers. After deep meditation, he achieved what Buddhists call enlightenment, a direct and complete understanding of the nature of mind and reality. This moment transformed Siddhartha into Buddha, the awakened one. But note carefully, he did not receive this title by divine intervention or by his own proclamation. Buddha was not his name, but a description of his state of consciousness. He woke up to reality as it is, without distortions, without illusions. For 45 years after his enlightenment, Buddha roamed northern India sharing his understanding. He did not establish lavish temples or create complex rituals. He did not write sacred books or demand worship. He simply invited people to investigate for themselves the nature of mind and reality. This is a crucial point for us to understand his last words. Buddha never presented himself as an infallible authority or as a savior. He described himself as a guide, someone who had found a path and simply pointed it out to others. Consider his own words. "Do not follow me unless you are prepared to be like the elephant trainer who follows the footprints of the elephant in the forest." In other words, don't follow me blindly. Follow the path I've taken and see for yourself where it leads. This radically non-dogmatic stance is essential to understanding the impact of his final words. The last days. At age 80, Buddha knew his time was near. During a journey with his disciples towards Kushinagar in northeastern India, he accepted a meal offered by a blacksmith named Kunda. Tradition states that a dish called Sukara Madhava was served, the exact translation of which remains uncertain, and could be pork or a type of mushroom. What we know is that Buddha, already elderly and in fragile health, fell seriously ill after this meal. A touching detail from this episode, realizing that the food was spoiled, Buddha insisted that it only be served to him, protecting his disciples. Even on the brink of death, his compassion remained unwavering. As his condition worsened, Buddha continued his journey, stopping frequently due to extreme weakness. In these final moments, he did not turn to miracles to extend his life or alleviate his suffering. He accepted the reality of impermanence that he had taught for so many years. In one of these moments of rest, he asked Ananda, his cousin and personal assistant for decades, for water. When Ananda reported that the nearby stream was cloudy and dirty, Buddha insisted, "Bring me water anyway." Until the end, he was teaching through actions, accepting reality as it is, not as we would like it to be. Finally, in Kushinagar, Buddha asked them to prepare a bed between two sala trees. The texts describe an extraordinary phenomenon. Although it was not the season, the trees fully blossomed, letting petals fall onto the body of the dying master, a symbol of the reverence of nature itself. Hundreds of disciples gathered. Some cried inconsolably, others maintained meditative composure. It is in this dramatic and emotionally charged context that the Buddha offers his final instructions. Imagine the scene, the sun setting, creating long shadows over the field where two sala trees lie in bloom. Among them, the weakened body of the man who had transformed the spiritual landscape of ancient India. All around, anxious faces, some marked by tears. The silence is heavy, broken only by the occasional sobs of disciples unable to contain their emotion. Buddha looks at the face of each person present. His breathing is labored, but his gaze remains clear, completely present. Then, in a weak but clear voice, he pronounces, "Vyadama Sankara, Apamadena Sampadetha." All compound things are impermanent. Strive diligently. This was his final message. These were the last words that the historical Buddha chose as his final legacy to humanity. The first layer, impermanence. Let's unpack these seemingly simple words, starting with the first part. All compound things are impermanent. In Pali, the language in which Buddha taught, this is the word anicca, impermanence. But it's not just a casual observation that things change. It is an ontological statement about the fundamental nature of reality. What Buddha is asserting is that absolutely everything we experience, every object, every thought, every emotion, every identity, every moment of consciousness, is in a constant state of flux. Nothing remains static, even for 2 consecutive moments. Think about your own body. Scientifically, we know today that the cells that make up your body are constantly dying and being replaced. The body you inhabit now is not the same as it was 10 years ago, or even a few months ago. Each atom is in constant movement, each molecule participating in infinite biochemical processes. The same goes for your mind. Thoughts arise and disappear like bubbles in a lake. Emotions float like clouds in the sky. Even your deepest sense of identity, what you call self, is in perpetual transformation. If we look beyond ourselves, we see the same principle. Relationships evolve, societies transform, empires rise and fall, species arise and disappear, planets form and eventually disintegrate, stars are born and die, galaxies collide and merge. Nothing, absolutely nothing, escapes this universal law of impermanence. But here is the profound paradox. Although this is a self-evident truth, we behave as if the opposite were true. We build solid and immutable identities. We cling to possessions as if we could take them with us. We cultivate relationships, expecting them to stay exactly the same. We create institutions that we intend to last forever. And when inevitable change occurs, when we lose someone we love, when our body becomes sick or grows old, when a relationship ends, when we lose status or position, we suffer intensely because we are resisting the fundamental reality of the universe. Everything changes. Psychologist and death researcher Elizabeth Kubler-Ross observed that much of human suffering comes not from pain itself, but from resistance to pain, from denial of reality. This is exactly what Buddha was pointing out 2,500 years earlier. Consider the story of Kisa Gotami, a young mother who lost her only son. Maddened by grief, she carried the child's body through the streets, begging everyone for a medicine that could bring him back to life. When she reached Buddha, he said he could help her, but she would first need to bring a handful of mustard seeds from a house where no one had ever died. Kisa went door to door, but each home had its own story of loss. Gradually, she understood that death is universal, that impermanence affects everyone equally. This realization did not eliminate his pain, but it transformed it. She was finally able to bury her son, and eventually became one of Buddha's most accomplished disciples. This story shows us something crucial. Recognizing impermanence does not make us indifferent or apathetic. On the contrary, it makes us more present, more compassionate, more able to appreciate the preciousness of each moment. When we truly understand impermanence, our relationship with time transforms. Instead of living in regret about the past or anxiety about the future, an awareness of impermanence invites us to fully inhabit the present, the only moment that truly exists. Neuroscientist and author Sam Harris describes, "The present is all we have, the only thing that is never not there. It is in this present, in this impermanent moment, that our entire life happens. And it is only when we are fully present that we can experience the freedom and peace that Buddha was pointing to." The second layer, diligence. The second part of Buddha's final message is equally profound. Strive diligently. In Pali, this is the word appamada, vigilance, mindfulness, diligence. This is not about hard work in the conventional sense, but about a specific quality of awareness and intentionality. If the first part of the message shows us the nature of reality, impermanent, the second tells us how to live in this reality with full attention. Contemporary Buddhist philosopher and monk Matthieu Ricard explains that appamada means not to be distracted from what is essential. In other words, it is living with full awareness of what really matters. In our age of perpetual distraction, this advice takes on extraordinary relevance. Consider how many hours a day we spend absorbed in thoughts about the past, which cannot be changed, or worries about the future, which has not yet arrived. How many hours do we waste on digital distractions, on empty conversations, on activities that don't reflect our deepest values? The diligence that Buddha recommends is not a productivist obsession. It's not about doing more, but about being more present in whatever we're doing. It means bringing quality of attention to every moment, every action, every relationship. When we eat, we really experience the food. When we talk, we really listen to the other person. When we work, we do so with full presence. When we rest completely, without guilt or anxiety. This quality of presence is radically countercultural in a society that values multitasking and constant stimulation. But paradoxically, it is also the path to deeper productivity and a richer life. Neuroscience research confirms what Buddha intuitively taught. Our brains were not designed to multitask. When we try to do several things simultaneously, we are actually just rapidly switching our attention, making each task worse and exhausting our cognitive resources more quickly. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, in his studies on the state of flow, that experience of total immersion in an activity that represents our best performance and greatest satisfaction, discovered that this state occurs precisely when we are completely absorbed in the present moment, neither anxious nor bored but perfectly engaged. This is the diligence that Buddha recommended, total presence, moment to moment. And here is the deep connection between the two parts of the final message. It is precisely because everything is impermanent that every moment deserves our full attention. It is because life is brief and precious that we must live it diligently. An ancient Buddhist text compares human life to a drop of dew on the tip of a strand of grass, about to disappear with the first ray of morning sunlight. If our existence is so ephemeral, how can we justify living it distractedly? The third layer, spiritual autonomy. There is also a third layer of meaning in the Buddha's last words that often goes unnoticed, the invitation to spiritual autonomy. Notice what Buddha didn't say in his final moments. He did not establish a hierarchy of succession. He did not name a spiritual heir. He did not create complex rituals or rigid doctrines. He did not ask them to build temples in his memory or to venerate him as a deity. Instead, he pointed to universal principles, impermanence and diligence, that anyone can verify for themselves through direct experience. This radically non-hierarchical, experiential approach is at the heart of what the Buddha taught throughout his life. We find this explicitly articulated in the Kalama Sutra, where Buddha advises, do not believe in something simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in traditions just because they have been handed down through generations. Do not believe in rumors or the opinions of the majority. Do not even believe in me out of respect. But when you yourselves observe and analyze and find that something leads to the benefit and happiness of all, then accept it and live accordingly. This is a revolutionary stance for any spiritual leader. Buddha was essentially saying, do not take my word for truth. Test these principles for yourself. Be your own authority. Contemporary philosopher Stephen Batchelor describes this as secular Buddhism, an approach that does not rely on metaphysics, dogma, or ritual, but which emphasizes empirical investigation and personal verification. This spiritual autonomy is implicit in the Buddha's last words. By pointing to universal principles rather than specific doctrines, he was inviting each person to embark on their own journey of discovery. It's as if he's saying, Jack, don't build a monument to me, don't create a religion in my name. Simply realize the impermanence of all things and live your life mindfully. The rest will come naturally. This anti-authoritarian approach is deeply aligned with the modern scientific spirit. Physicist Richard Feynman expressed a similar sentiment when he said, I would rather not know the answer than have the wrong answer. Both Buddha and the best of science invite us to question, doubt, test, and verify for ourselves. Tragically, as with virtually all great teachings, this message of spiritual autonomy has often been obscured by institutions, hierarchies, and dogmas that have arisen in the name of Buddhism. The paradox is profound. A fundamentally non-authoritarian, non-dogmatic experiential teaching has in many cases been transformed into rigid traditions that emphasize precisely the opposite: authority, dogma, and belief. Why are these words little known? Given the depth of these last words, an intriguing question arises. Why are they not more widely known and celebrated? Several factors contribute to this relative lack of knowledge. First, the words are too simple. Paradoxically, their very simplicity makes them easy to ignore. Many people seek complex spiritual teachings, elaborate esotericism, mystical practices. All things are impermanent. Strive diligently seems almost disappointingly straightforward. Philosopher Alan Watts observed that the highest wisdom is always the simplest, but our conditioned mind often resists this simplicity, seeking something more special or complex. Second, these words challenge individual ego and institutional power structures. Recognizing impermanence means accepting our own mortality and the transience of everything we value, a truth that the ego fiercely resists. Similarly, religious institutions generally prefer to emphasize teachings that reinforce their own authority and continuity, not those that point to the impermanence of all structures, including themselves. Third, different Buddhist traditions have evolved over millennia, each emphasizing different aspects of the teachings. Theravada tends to focus on monastic discipline and the original sutras. The Mahayana developed complex philosophies about emptiness and Buddha nature. Vajrayana incorporated tantric elements and esoteric practices. In this vast ocean of teachings, the simple final words of the historical Buddha are sometimes lost. Fourth, the true depth of these words is only revealed through practice. Reading or hearing about impermanence is one thing. Experiencing it directly through sustained meditative practice is something completely different. As Zen master Shunryu Suzuki said, "In the mind of the beginner there are many possibilities. In the mind of the expert, few." There is a Zen story that illustrates this point well. A university professor visits a Zen master, ostensibly to learn about Zen. As the master pours tea, he continues filling the cup even after it is full, causing the tea to overflow across the table. When the teacher protests, the master responds, "Like this cup, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" Likewise, Buddha's last words are not concepts to be analyzed intellectually, but truths to be experienced directly. And this requires a quality of openness and receptivity that is rare in our frenetic, hyper-stimulated culture. The last words in the modern world. It is impressive how these last words, spoken 2,500 years ago, speak directly to the dilemmas of the contemporary world. We live in an era defined by accelerated change, technological, climate, social, political. Uncertainty has become our constant companion. And yet, we continue to seek security and permanence in a world where such qualities are intrinsically illusory. The impermanence that Buddha pointed out is not just an arcane spiritual truth. It is our everyday reality, more evident now than perhaps at any other time in human history. At the same time, we live in the age of perpetual distraction. The attention economy competes fiercely for every moment of our consciousness. Constant notifications, endless feeds, algorithms designed to keep us engaged. All of these militate against the very quality of consciousness that Buddha called appamada. Anthropologist Thomas Hilland Erickson notes in his book, Tyranny of the Moment, that we are living in an era in which fast time is overtaking slow time, where moments of contemplation, reflection, and presence are being systematically eliminated by technologies that promise efficiency but deliver fragmentation. Psychologist and neuroscientist Adam Gazzaley coined the term old mind, new world to describe this mismatch. Our neurological hardware, evolved over millions of years for a completely different rhythm of life, now faces an informational environment for which it is not biologically prepared. In this context, Buddha's last words are not just relevant, they are urgent. They offer not just a philosophy, but a practical path to navigating the challenges of the modern world. Imagine what it would be like if we deeply internalized the truth of impermanence. Paradoxically, this would not lead us to despair, but to a deeper appreciation of each moment. It would not make us indifferent, but more engaged, knowing that each interaction, each choice, each gesture matters precisely because it is transitory. What if we incorporated the quality of appamada into our lives? This would not mean abandoning technology or productivity, but developing them in the service of a deeper consciousness, not as a substitute for it. On a social and political level, understanding impermanence could help us navigate inevitable changes with more grace and less resistance. We could realize that institutions, economies, and societies are also subject to the universal law of change. It is not about resisting all change or uncritically embracing any new trend, but about discerning which changes promote genuine well-being and which only perpetuate suffering in new forms. Practical application. Living the last words. How can we incorporate these last words into our everyday lives? Here are some practical approaches. To cultivate awareness of impermanence, practice formal meditation, observing the arising and passing of sensations, thoughts, and emotions. Regular contemplation of one's mortality, not as a morbid exercise, but as a reminder of the preciousness of life. Document changes through photographs, journals, or simply mindful attention, noticing how our bodies, relationships, and circumstances are constantly evolving. Practice non-attachment in small things. Try letting go of objects, opinions, or habits that we are attached to. Develop the ability to appreciate transient beauty, a sunset, a song, a conversation, without trying to possess or preserve it. To cultivate diligence, appamada, establish regular periods of digital detox, hours or days without electronic devices. Practice monotasking, doing one thing at a time with full attention. Create checkpoints throughout the day, moments to pause and ask, am I present now? Am I investing my attention in a way that aligns with my deepest values? Simplify, reduce commitments, possessions, and information consumption to create space for greater presence. Incorporate mindfulness practices into everyday activities, walking mindfully, eating mindfully, listening fully. Neuroscientist and author Rick Hanson suggests a practice he calls taking in the good, mindfully staying with positive experiences for 20-30 seconds, allowing them to really sink into the nervous system. This practice beautifully combines the two parts of Buddha's final message. We recognize the impermanence of the positive moment, but we are fully present to it while it lasts. There is a story about a Zen master who, when asked how he practiced Zen, replied, "When I'm hungry, I eat. When I'm tired, I sleep." The frustrated student replied, "But isn't that what everyone does?" The master smiled. "No. Most people, when they eat, are thinking about 1,000 other things. When they are tired, they resist sleep or worry about the next day." This is the essence of the diligence that Buddha recommended. Total presence in every activity, however mundane it may seem. Inspiring examples. Throughout history, we encounter people who deeply embodied the spirit of Buddha's last words, demonstrating how this understanding can transform not just individual lives, but entire societies. Consider Emperor Ashoka, who ruled much of the Indian subcontinent in the 3rd century BC. After years of bloody military campaigns, he underwent a profound transformation after witnessing the devastation caused by his conquests. Converting to Buddhism, he dedicated the remainder of his reign to promoting peace, social welfare, and religious harmony. His edicts, engraved on stone pillars across India, still inspire today with his vision of compassionate governance. It is remarkable how Ashoka, after his transformation, ruled with full awareness of impermanence. He did not build monuments to his own glory, but hospitals, roads, and public wells. He did not seek territorial expansion, but well-being for all beings. His diligence manifested itself not in the accumulation of power, but in service to the common good. In more recent times, figures such as Thich Nhat Hanh exemplify this same understanding. During the Vietnam War, as bombs fell all around him, he led non-violent humanitarian relief efforts, demonstrating extraordinary equanimity amid the chaos. Forced into exile, he turned this painful circumstance into an opportunity to share teachings of peace and mindfulness globally. The remarkable thing about Thich Nhat Hanh is how he translates profound concepts into accessible practices. His "walking, I know I'm walking" sums up diligence perfectly. His observation that peace is in every step encapsulates the understanding that in a world where everything is in constant flux, stability comes not from static external circumstances, but from an internal presence cultivated moment by moment. Even figures not explicitly Buddhist have demonstrated the wisdom of these last words. Viktor Frankl, a Jewish psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, wrote in The Search for Meaning, "Everything can be taken from a man except one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any set of circumstances. This is a deep understanding of impermanence, coupled with diligence." Frankl recognized that although he could not control the brutal circumstances around him, impermanence, he could consciously choose his response in each moment, industrialism. This understanding not only helped him survive, but became the basis of logotherapy, his transformative approach to psychotherapy. What would be different? Ask yourself honestly, what would your life be like if you truly integrated Buddha's last words? If you truly understood, not just intellectually but viscerally, that everything is impermanent. Your body, your mind, your relationships, your possessions, your reputation, your own identity. How would that transform your priorities? If you practiced genuine diligence, bringing a quality of presence to every moment, when working, when relating, when resting, when facing challenges, how would that change your everyday experience? Paradoxically, accepting impermanence does not lead us to nihilism or hopelessness, but to a deeper appreciation of life. When we know that nothing lasts forever, every moment becomes precious. Every encounter with a loved one is perceived in its irreplicable uniqueness. Each experience takes on a precious quality precisely because it is transitory. Likewise, practicing diligence does not mean living in a perpetual state of tension or effort, but experiencing life with greater richness and depth. There is a quality of restful alertness that comes naturally when we are fully present, neither scattered by distraction nor contracted by anxiety, but simply here fully engaged with the moment as it is. Contemporary Zen master Joan Halifax describes this as open-rootedness, a stability that comes not from rigidity, but from flexibility, a presence that does not resist change, but dances with it. Conclusion. In the twilight of Kushinagar, As the daylight faded and the flowers of the sala trees fell like silent blessings, a man who had dedicated his life to freedom from suffering offered his final words, Vayadhamma sankhara, apamadena sampadetha. All compound things are impermanent. Strive diligently. These words have traveled 2,500 years to reach us, not as a historical relic, but as a living invitation. An invitation to see clearly the nature of reality, an invitation to live with total presence, an invitation to liberation that comes not from escaping impermanence, but from fully embracing it. The texts describe that, after uttering these words, Buddha entered progressively deeper states of meditation until finally reaching parinirvana, the complete cessation of the cycle of birth and death. Some disciples, not yet fully enlightened, wept inconsolably. Others, who had deeply understood the teachings, remained in serene contemplation. One of the oldest monks, Anuruddha, uttered verses that concluded, "With a firm mind, he bore all pain." Like the extinguishing of a lamp was the liberation of his consciousness. It is significant that even in his own moment of death, the most dramatic manifestation of impermanence, Buddha remained completely present, completely awake. He not only taught about impermanence and diligence, he embodied them until his last breath. Here is the invitation these last words offer to each of us, to live with full awareness of the transitory nature of all things, not as an abstract concept, but as a living, moment-to-moment experience, and simultaneously bring a quality of total presence to every aspect of our lives, knowing that it is precisely impermanence that makes each moment infinitely precious. How will you respond to this invitation? What seeds will these last words plant in your consciousness? What fruits can they bear in your life? Buddha's last words were not an endpoint, but a beginning that is renewed every moment. One awakens to the truth of impermanence and chooses to live diligently. This video is just a pointer, like a finger pointing to the moon. The words you heard are just symbols. The true message is beyond words, available directly in your own experience here and now. Vayadhamma sankhara, apamadena sampadetha. All composite things are impermanent. Strive diligently.